And welcome to Fox News at Night. I'm Shannon Bream. Tonight from New York. New tonight, phase 1 is complete. It is now on to phase 2 with the release of the memo. The Republican chairman of the House Intelligence Committee says this is just the beginning, not the end. First, the investigation into alleged abuse of surveillance laws in order to spy on the Trump campaign, summarized in today's declassified memo. Next, investigations into other agencies, including the State Department. We've got team coverage tonight on this breaking story. Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry following the fallout for top DOJ and FBI officials. Lauren Blanchard tracking a memo the Democrats want released. But we begin with Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge, who was the first journalist to get excerpts of the memo. So, Catherine, what exactly does it say, and what, if anything, does it prove?
Well, Shannon, it all began when the White House sent a letter to the House Intelligence Committee confirming the president had used his authority as commander-in-chief to fully declassify the records without changes or redactions. The memo paints a troubling picture.
The newly declassified 4-page Republican staff memo makes the case that the secret National Security Court was kept in the dark by the FBI and Justice Department when they sought and secured a surveillance warrant for Trump campaign aide Carter Page. The memo says the court was never told the former British spy, who was paid by Democrats to put together the Trump dossier, had a personal animus toward the presidential nominee. In September 2016, Christopher Steele admitted to Justice Department official Bruce Orr his feelings against then-candidate Trump when Steele said he, quote, was desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being president. Orr was recently demoted over his contacts with Steele and Glenn Simpson, whose opposition research firm Fusion GPS directed the Trump project. Bank records obtained by the House committee show Orr's wife Nellie worked for Fusion GPS and began investigating Trump as early as May 2016. Republican investigators said the court was also never told about the dossier's political roots. Neither the initial FISA application in October 2016 nor any of the renewals disclose or reference the role of the DNC, Clinton campaign, or any party campaign in funding Steele's efforts, even though the political origins of the Steele dossier were then known to senior DOJ and FBI officials. According to the memo, Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe testified before the committee in December 2017 that no surveillance warrant would have been sought without the Steele dossier information. McCabe was removed earlier this week. British court records show Fusion GPS directed Steele to quietly brief a half-dozen American media outlets in the fall of 2016, but the majority did not go with the story. But one who did was apparently used to justify FBI surveillance. The Carter Page FISA application also cited extensively a September 23, 2016 Yahoo News article by Michael Isikoff, which focuses on Page's July 2016 trip to Moscow. In a Fox interview last spring, Page denied working with the Russians.
I have never broken any law or done anything untoward in Russia or relating to any Russian person.
According to the memo, an FBI counterintelligence chief said the corroboration of the Steele dossier was in the early stages, even as the initial Page FISA application was submitted. Days before the inauguration, Comey later testified he told the president-elect at Trump Tower the dossier was, quote, salacious and unverified. But strikingly, the dossier was used repeatedly to renew the surveillance of Page by Comey, his deputy McCabe, then Obama Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates, and later by Trump appointee Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
Republicans raise the specter of legality over the handling of the Trump dossier and representations made to the National Security Court. Today, the Attorney General sent a formal referral to the Inspector General for further investigation. Shannon.
All right, Catherine Herridge on top of this story for months now. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
We appreciate it. All right, we turn now to Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry and claims tonight the memo's release could mean the president is ready to release some top DOJ officials. What do you know about that, Ed?
Well, Shannon, it's interesting. There's a lot of talk about a house cleaning. The White House denies it. But new tonight, 2 congressional sources are charging that back on January 10th, Devin Nunes and Rod Rosenstein had a private meeting that grew so contentious that the Deputy Attorney General threatened to open an investigation of Congress. This was a meeting that included Nunes pressing Rosenstein and FBI Director Christopher Wray about producing FISA documents. And according to the congressional sources, Rosenstein grew so angry he threatened to subpoena emails from the House Intelligence Committee despite obvious separation of power issues. Shows how divisive this has become between some congressional Republicans and the Justice Department of President Trump, who today told reporters this memo was terrible and a disgrace. And since Rosenstein was a part of renewing some of these FISA warrants, that led to the obvious question whether the president still has confidence in his Deputy Attorney General. He seemed lukewarm.
Are you not concerned that the FBI doesn't want the memo out?
Thank you very much.
Does it make you more likely to fire Rosenstein? Do you still have confidence in him after reading the memo?
You figure that one out.
Well, tonight, White House spokesman Raj Shah said the president has no plans to fire Rosenstein and is expecting him to continue in his job, a significant question since it's Rosenstein who appointed special counsel Robert Mueller to lead the Russia probe after Attorney General Jeff Sessions recused himself from anything connected to the 2016 election, and Rosenstein is overseeing the scope and the budget of Mueller's probe. While Democrats on the Intelligence Committee, led by Adam Schiff, have charged Nunes designed this memo to undermine Mueller's probe, the chairman insisted otherwise in an exclusive interview with Fox's Bret Baier.
But you know there are some members who are using this to question the Mueller investigation. Are you separating the two?
Well, I think what's happening is I think the mainstream media and the Democrats are tying this to the Mueller investigation because they're trying to perpetuate this nonsense of obstruction of justice because they've left the Russia collusion issue. They know there was no collusion.
Now, no evidence yet of collusion, as Nunes said, but these investigations are continuing tonight on two tracks. Mueller still probing potential obstruction of justice charges, while Nunes and the Justice Department Inspector General are basically investigating the investigators. Shannon?
All right, Ed Henry live for us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Democrats have their own memo they want released, and there are Republicans who are publicly supporting that move. Lauren Blanchard joins us live with that side of the story. Good evening, Lauren.
Hi, Shannon. Well, Democrats want the chance to get their own counter memo out into the public. The top Democrat on the House Intel Committee says he believes the White House will have no choice but to publish their version.
I think the president would be hard-pressed to try to suppress this memo, particularly since they claim they're releasing the GOP memo in the interest of transparency. So I think they're going to be forced to release it.
The House Intel Committee Democrats released a statement today detailing their plan to bring up their memo for a vote on Monday, saying they want to lay out the, quote, serious mischaracterizations in the GOP's memo about the FISA applications. Democrats also say their memo would lay out more context for why Carter Page was being investigated, saying the FBI would have good reason to be concerned about Page. Like the Republicans, the Democrats' memo would have to be voted out of committee, and then President Trump would have 5 days to review it and approve or deny its release.
We're going through a process the majority did not because we do want to make sure that we protect sources and methods. And I would expect that our memo is likely to be redacted because we're giving the agencies that opportunity.
The chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, telling Special Report he's fine bringing up the Democrats' memo for a vote, despite that committee rejecting a motion by Representative Schiff this past Monday to do just that.
Will you vote to release the Democrats' memo?
Yeah, we will.
When is that going to happen?
But it has to go through the same process.
When do you think it'll be released?
Hard to say. I don't know yet.
The White House says it stands ready to work with congressional members. However, if the White House does deny the release, the issue then goes to the entire House of Representatives for a vote. Shannon?
All right, Lauren Blanchard live for us tonight in D.C. Thank you. Our next guest says what he's seen proves he's been right all along. The Russian collusion narrative is built on a, quote, rotten foundation. Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz serves on the House Judiciary Committee and joins us live. Congressman, great to see you tonight.
Good to see you, Shannon.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the reaction today. This is from Richard Haass, a tweet from him today. He says, the memo is largely devoted to discrediting the decision to monitor Carter Page because some percentage of the intelligence came from a source deemed to be prejudiced. The memo fails to discredit the substance of the case or deal with other justifications for monitoring Page. Are we only hearing part of the story in this memo?
Absolutely not, Shannon. You had a circumstance here where FISA warrants were reauthorized based on faulty information. Look, this dossier was so uncredible that they had to go and have this Yahoo News article planted by Christopher Steele to function as the validating information. Meanwhile, you've got the Democratic Party buying their way into the Justice Department. DNC money goes to a law firm, which then goes to Fusion GPS. Fusion GPS needs two things: dirt on Donald Trump and a way to get that into the intelligence bloodstream. So they hire Christopher Steele to make up the dirt, and then they hire Nellie Ohr, the wife of Bruce Ohr. And let's remember, Bruce Ohr's charge at the Justice Department is to deal with counter-narcotics and drug enforcement, but somehow at the same time his wife is hired by Fusion GPS, he starts taking counterintelligence meeting and valeting this information paid for by the Democratic Party into the Justice Department and the FBI, and then ultimately it's so bogus that it's got to be validated by a Yahoo News article planted by Christopher Steele.
Okay, we don't yet know how much a percentage of the basis for the application for the warrant was based on the dossier. We know it was at least part of it. Would you support the declassification of the FISA application so we know more about that? Would you support voting for what the Democrats want to release in their memo, which they say paints the rest of the picture and gives context to everything?
Well, we do know what Andrew McCabe said, and he's no, talking head for the Republican Party. And Andrew McCabe said, but for this dossier, there never would have been a FISA memo.
Now, there are Democrats who are denying that tonight. They say that's not accurate. They were there. They've read or seen or heard the testimony themselves. They say that's not a fair characterization.
That is a verifiable fact. And so to answer your question, Shannon, I do support the release of any information the Democrats would like to provide, but they're all over the place. First, the Democrats voted against allowing members of Congress to see this information. They voted against even opening the investigation in the first place, saying it was just a distraction. I think all the American people can see now there is merit into looking into why you would have FISA warrants issued based on a political opposition research memo. For the first time in American history, this has happened. And so let's release their information. Let's have a public debate about it. But they've done something a little tricky, Shannon. The Democrats embedded into their memo sources and methods. And so as bad as some of us would want to release that immediately, it has to undergo the same process, just as Chairman Nunes said, so that we don't put people in danger. But their claims should already be deemed so uncredible. Remember just days ago when Democrats were saying, oh, if we release the Republican memo, there'll be all these sources and methods exposed. People will be in danger. Blood will be on the hands of Devin Nunes and the Republicans. I think the American people could see now how outrageous those claims were. This was information we needed out in the public.
Yeah, I've read the memo myself. People can do it. It's a quick read. They can decide whether or not there's anything in there. To me, it looks like something you'd read in a newspaper article or a first-year law class. I didn't see anything there that was so insightful or decisive or classified that it would live up to those claims. So that does raise some questions. I want to read a little bit of a letter from top Democrats in the House and Senate to the president today saying this: the decision to release a partisan and misleading memo over the objections of your own Federal Bureau of Investigation director and the Department of Justice was a transparent attempt to discredit the hardworking men and women of law enforcement who are investigating Russia's interference with our presidential election and that nation's ties to your campaign. Now, we saw that Speaker Ryan said just days ago he doesn't want Republicans connecting these two, that these are two separate issues. You shouldn't bring the Russia issue into this. Is it possible to see the two things, interpret them separately for what they are, or the Democrats right that this is simply about discrediting the Russia investigation?
Well, I don't entirely agree with the Speaker's characterization. I would say that this is far bigger than Russia or Donald Trump or even the Mueller probe. This is the first time in American history that politics has weaponized the FBI. And of course, the FBI and Department of Justice have been fighting to keep this information away from the American people. Look at what they did. They ultimately fire Christopher Steele. They remove the authorization for payment for him, and then they go and reauthorize wiretapping on American citizens based on information that they knew was false, based on an author of a dossier that they had already let go, and then they never told that to a FISA court. I mean, think about that, Shannon. They never told the FISA judge that they had to release Christopher Steele for not being credible. And this is not an adversarial court system where there's a defense attorney. This is a secret court with a prosecutor and a judge, and they made fundamental misrepresentations of fact and of omission to those judges. And ultimately, that's bigger than Mueller. That's bigger than Trump, and it's bigger than Russia. It's about the foundation of our democracy and the institutions we must trust to preserve it.
Yeah, we're going to talk with a couple of attorneys coming up about some of those issues with the FISA court, how it works, and what could be done to kind of reaffirm or at least establish some credibility in the eyes of Americans who maybe don't understand all the nuances about it. We'll talk about that coming up. In the meantime, Congressman Matt Gaetz, thanks for joining us. Good to see you.
Thank you, Shannon. Go Knowles.
That's right. All right, big day for the markets. Investors sold everything, stocks, bonds, and commodities. The strength in the labor market and wage growth made some worry that the Feds will raise interest rates sooner rather than later. U.S. employers hired more people in January than economists had forecast. 200,000 jobs were added, 20,000 more than expected. Wage growth had been sluggish for the past few years, and in January it shot up quickly, 2.9%, increasing at the fastest rate since 2009. Inflation, though, experts say, makes some investors nervous. Well, ICE agents in Northern California searching 77 businesses in one of the largest raids since President Trump took office. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Acting Director Thomas Homan has said in the past, California better hold on tight. Those are his words after declaring itself a sanctuary state last month. The raids hit the San Francisco Bay Area. One immigration attorney is quoted as saying the size and scope of the operation was unprecedented. The father of 3 girls abused by former Team USA gymnastics doctor Larry Nassar tried to attack him in court. It happened during the sentencing phase of Nassar's final trial. Randall Margraves had asked the judge for 5 minutes alone with Nassar. Of course, the judge refused. 2 of his daughters had just addressed the court to talk about their experiences. A few hours later, the father apologized.
I look over here and Larry Nassar's shaking his head no, like it didn't happen. Who would put herself through this if it didn't happen? I lost control. I apologize 100 times.
Saying she empathized with the parents, the judge offered her condolences, and she said there's not going to be any punishment for that dad. All right, we're going to continue our coverage and analysis of the Republican FISA memo. Was it just an effort to undermine special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe, as Democrats suggest, or are they playing with some reverse psychology? We will discuss the political fallout. And McCain slams his own party today, why this senator claims the Republicans are doing Putin's job for him. And where in the world is the Olympic torch? Details from its journey through South Korea as we come to you tonight from New York. The week began with the State of the Union, and it is closing with the release of the memo. The president clearly believes he's got the political mojo at this point, so is he right? Let's ask Vince Colanese, editorial director, Daily Caller, and host WMAL Mornings on the Mall. And Juan Williams, co-host of The Five. He's made the trip back to Washington. I'm here in New York, so we'll keep each other's seats warm until we're back where we're supposed to be. Good to see you both tonight.
Nice to see you, Shannon.
Okay, so we've heard a lot from the Democrats today saying this is all about undermining Mueller. So I thought it was interesting that Trey Gowdy, it turns out he was one of the key authors of this memo. He saw all the underlying intelligence, said this: as I have repeatedly said, I also remain 100% confident in special counsel Robert Mueller. The contents of this memo do not in any way discredit his investigation. So, Juan, are these claims about this all being about discrediting Mueller just smoke?
No, I think that, in fact, Speaker of the House Paul Ryan said very much the same thing, that he believes in the Mueller investigation, thinks it should continue, as clearly in the polls a majority of the American people do. It's overwhelming. But when you put out this kind of memo, I don't think there's any question that it does damage to the reputation of the FBI. We just listened to your very good interview with Congressman Gates. I mean, he is saying the FBI was politically biased and used politically weaponized, I think is what he said, in a way that was intended to damage one political candidate's campaign. And if you believe that, and then you believe that the Department of Justice, and in particularly Rod Rosenstein, the Deputy Attorney General, signed off on FISA request, knowing that this was false, of course, as an American, you would say, hey, that's not us, that's not the American people, that's wrong. So that would therefore call into question the entire probe.
All right. Well, there are Republicans, including, as I said, Trey Gowdy, the author of this memo, who says that's absolutely not what it's about. Okay, so let's read another tweet. This one comes to us from former Secretary of State John Kerry, and I can see Vince already smiling about this. It says the Nunes memo is dangerous, ugly, and an assault on the integrity of the institutions of our country. I lived through Watergate Nixon. America pays a very steep price when a political party tries to undermine the institutions that hold us together, and the whole world suffers when that happens to America. In Watergate, the difference was, regardless of party, eventually leaders on both sides said enough. The adults in the House GOP know better, and need to act like it. Vince, today, I thought it was interesting that Chairman Nunes said this was only phase one, this memo you got today. Our next step is looking at the State Department and what role they may have played.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of questions about the behavior of the government, especially during the 2016 election. And, you just think back to the conclusion of the election. You had Democrats questioning the FBI and the role it played in making Hillary Clinton lose the election because James Comey was going out in public and saying things in a very unconventional manner about the nature of her investigation, which was a far more mature investigation than any examination into Trump and Russia at that moment. So now, all of a sudden, questions about the FBI's integrity are considered attacks on patriotism, when obviously this is really about, I think in some sense, both parties kind of trying to call attention when appropriate to at times when they think the decisions by the FBI are the wrong ones. I think that, at any given moment, we should be skeptical, especially the way a secret court conducts itself. A court who conducts all of its operations in secrecy is going to be prone to make a couple of errors away from the direction of civil liberties. And I'm looking for civil libertarians on the left. I don't know where they went, because up until recently, most civil libertarians on the left would have said, okay, you know what? You need good evidence to spy on an American citizen. And I think that's in question today.
I mean, while this is something that has drawn people from across the spectrum, this idea of FISA and these courts and the monitoring, I mean, from Ron Wyden way on the left to, Rand Paul and the GOP and others, do you think that there's some common ground that people can say all Americans should be asking questions about this and exactly how it worked? And as an average citizen, regardless of your party, you should be concerned about getting answers.
Of course. But let me just point out that Devin Nunes, who led this, voted for the reauthorization of the Patriot Act recently and the FISA court. So that what you see is they're saying, yes, we believe in the FISA court, believe in what they're doing. They had the opportunity at that point to ask the questions. I think this is quite separate. Of course, we all want to make sure that our liberties are protected and that people are not unfairly targeted by government. But Shannon, in this instance, what it looks like is you have people going after our institutions. And I think this is what former Secretary of State Kerry was referring to, going after an institution that has been widely respected by the American people, and not just FBI, but then justice and others.
Very quickly, Vince, I want to make sure I give you another bite of this. Is this about going after institutions or about people who may have misinformed those institutions?
Look, I think that there needs to be a distinction here. Bill Maher said it recently. There's such a thing now in our culture as distinction deniers, people who refuse to see the difference between questioning, I think, the things that have evidence here, like political appointees making apparently poor decisions in political ones versus saying that we're attacking the rank and file in the FBI. That's just not happening. There's questions about the leadership here, and there's good reason for that. It's because you have the Clinton campaign leading a guy that they paid to the FBI's doorstep and getting him to help kickstart an investigation into people within the Trump campaign that seems to be based on very, very thin evidence.
But that's
I'm looking
not
forward to all
attacking the substance, Vince. There's nothing about the substance.
Well, if it's about the substance of what was presented to the FISA court, that is the discussion. But we got to leave it there. So I thank you both, and I hope you have a fantastic weekend, both of you, Vince and Juan.
Thank you.
We miss you.
Yes, you too.
We do.
See you soon. All right, that's it. Asked fired FBI Director James Comey, what does he really think about the controversial FISA memo released today? We're digging in deeper to his tweet tirades. And in night court, former Trump campaign aide Carter Page is ramping up his lawsuits in the wake of the memo. Does he have a case? Welcome back to Fox News at Night from New York City. Allies of James Comey and other officials named in the House intelligence memo note the dossier may have only been a small percentage of the information submitted to judges in order to get multiple FISA warrants. Jonathan Hunt's following reaction from the fired FBI director and joins us now. Hey, Jonathan.
Shannon, James Comey has been rivaling President Trump for tweet tirades in recent days, and today was no different. His latest coming after the controversial memo was released. And making full use of Twitter's expanded character count, the former FBI director wrote, quote, "That's it? Dishonest and misleading memo wrecked the House Intel Committee, destroyed trust with intelligence community, damaged relationship with FISA court, and inexcusably exposed classified investigation of an American citizen. For what? DOJ and FBI must keep doing their jobs. That followed Thursday's Twitter claim that, quote, weasels and liars never hold the field so long as good people stand up. Not a lot of schools or streets named for Joe McCarthy, a reference to the senator who held hearings in the 1950s to try to root out communists in the U.S. government. Comey, of course, has been a lightning rod for criticism from both sides of this deeply polarized political landscape. Some on the left blaming him for Hillary Clinton's loss after he announced the reopening of the Clinton email investigation 11 days before the presidential election. And since he was fired by President Trump, some Republicans have also soured on Comey. Congressman Peter King, for instance, criticizing today's memo tweet.
That was just a political response. He does not dispute one fact in this 4-page report. And this is a devastating indictment of his tenure at the FBI.
Recently, Comey has been teaching an ethics course at the College of William and Mary in Virginia and has kept himself busy, quite obviously, on Twitter. Comey, by the way, has never directly mentioned President Trump in a tweet. But if he's trying to counter the president's FBI narrative, Twitter might not be the best venue. Comey has a not unimpressive 708,000 followers, but the president has 47 million. Shannon?
So he does. Jonathan, thank you. Well, Senator John McCain taking on his old rival, President Trump, for approving the release of the highly controversial memo. The Republican senator saying, quote, if we continue to undermine our own rule of law, we are doing Putin's job for him. That said, the Trump administration has been talking tough on Moscow in recent days. Amy Kellogg has that story for us tonight. Amy?
Well, Shannon, there really wasn't much reaction in Russia to Ambassador Haley's pointed comments. But I think after the U.S. Treasury Department's essentially naming and shaming of the 200 or so most connected, rich and powerful Russians, essentially implying that the entire regime is tainted, I don't think this comes as too much of a shock. And frankly, Shannon, Russian officialdom today was focused on other things, commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Battle of Stalingrad, one of the bloodiest battles in military history, a turning point in World War II, and a point of both pride and pain for Russia. This is hours earlier. Ambassador Haley made a statement that you could say harkened back to another war, the Cold War.
Russia is not our friend. There may be some things we can work with them on, and we should do that when we can. But Russia is not, will not be our friend as long as their government has the values that it has, and as long as it conducts itself the way it does internationally.
Frankly, a lot of Russians felt the publication of the list of rich, over $1 billion rich, and connected was punishment for a foreign policy that the U.S. is not happy with. The Kremlin Tuesday said the list amounted to a, quote, roster of enemies of the U.S., and pretty much the whole regime is on it.
Everyone is on that list. Everyone. So there's nothing to say. It's a generalized approach. Worth noting that de facto, everyone has been called an adversary of the United States.
Now, Shannon, some Russians admitted that the publication of this list will probably have some economic impact on Russia, and certainly reputational damage will be done. But others kind of brushed it off as a mere copy-paste of Forbes's recent Russia rich list and also the Kremlin phone directory. President Putin himself was rather sarcastic in many ways about it, and he also used, Shannon, an expression that I've never heard before, which is, the dogs will bark, but the caravan moves on, which I understand means that people will make the noise they feel they need to make, but things will continue on, basically, as they are. Shannon?
Time now for Where in the World. Let's start with Spain, handing over a Russian suspected of being one of the world's most notorious spammers to U.S. Marshals tonight. Peter Levashov was arrested on vacation in Barcelona. U.S. authorities say they have linked him to billions of spam emails. Levashov's lawyers say the case is politically motivated. Well, the Olympic torch making its way across South Korea 1 week until the opening ceremony for the Winter Olympic Games. It wound its way through a South Korean mountain range today via a brand new pedestrian suspension bridge. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson kicking off his six-nation Latin America trip in Mexico. Protesters showed up outside a meeting with Mexico's president focused on so-called dreamers. Inside, we're told that Tillerson tried to ease worries about immigration, NAFTA, and President Trump. Sudan mobilizing forces along its border with Eritrea amid reports that Eritrea is massing troops on its side. Tensions are rising as Ethiopia builds a new dam on the Nile River, upsetting that entire region's already delicate balance of power. And trouble in paradise. The Maldives are a prime destination for the rich and famous, but as government opposition protesters took to the streets, police warned crowds there that they wouldn't be responsible for damage caused by using force. The country's Supreme Court ordered the release and retrial of its exiled former president. Full coverage of the Republican memo continues. What does it reveal about special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation? We will talk with some top government attorneys next. And the Philadelphia Eagles take on the New England Patriots this weekend. Predictions? Well, we've got one. Democrats suggesting President Trump is using the memo in an effort to discredit special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian interference. Now that we've digested its contents and analyzed the political fallout, what's next? Joining me now, National Security Attorney Bradley Moss and Ken Cuccinelli, former Attorney General of Virginia. Welcome to you both.
Absolutely. Good evening.
Good to be with you.
All right, Ken, I want to start with you because you've actually argued a case or presented a case at the FISA court. It's kind of a rare thing. People wonder what goes on in there. It's very secretive for a lot of good reasons. But one of the things that's always concerned me as an attorney is that it's an ex parte proceeding, meaning that only one side is represented. You can't notify someone who's about to be potentially surveilled, hey, you might want to send over an attorney to this thing. But is there a way to have a public advocate or someone else in there? Because the American people hear about this and they wonder, is it fair when it's only so one-sided?
You know, when the Patriot Act, so-called Patriot Act, was reauthorized in 2015, this sort of ombudsman role was heavily discussed. It got I think, as far as it's ever gone. And like you said, Shannon, unlike criminal cases where eventually a defendant will learn about the process leading up to their charge, that doesn't happen in what amounts to a national security investigation, except on those very rare instances that criminal charges do result. But you don't know that you're being spied upon. You don't know that a warrant has been obtained on you. And like you said, there can be very good reasons. But I think this memo, in addition to the political disputes, what does it mean for Trump or Mueller? It also is really bringing into focus for a lot of Americans who've never seen it before just how unaccountable the fisc really is. And what I hope comes out of this is some reforms that provide some sort of check or balance within the process, just like you described.
Yeah, and when people look at the statistics, and it's hard to know exactly because a lot of this will never be public, but in those who do try to track these cases, it's very rare by the time it's actually presented. And it goes through a long process to get there. But by the time the application makes it there, it's exceptionally rare that it gets turned down. Bradley, I want to read you something from a Washington Post article and get your response. It says, the bottom line is that this memo further confirms that somebody colluded with the Russians, that somebody withheld material information from government officials, and that somebody even used laundered money to pay for campaign dirt that was partially supplied by Russian agents. Well, that somebody was not the Trump campaign. That should matter a great deal to Mueller. So where does this investigation go from here?
Well, yeah, you know, the response from James Comey today on Twitter was, you know, that's it. My response to being a child of the 80s was, where's the beef? What was this memo supposed to show us? All it talked about was that Carter Page, who, as far as the Trump campaign told us, was a nobody, an irrelevant nothing. He had no involvement of any substance in the campaign, never talked to then candidate Trump, was surveilled 3 weeks after he left the campaign. He was no longer part of it, and a mere 2 or 3 weeks before Election Day. This is the big scandal, is that they surveilled Carter Page at that point, 2 or 3 weeks before the election itself, someone who had been on the DOJ's radar since 2013 for communicating with Russian intelligence operatives.
Well, Bradley, do you not think it's significant that they didn't tell them a lot of information? When you go to a FISA judge, they have to rely on what you tell them. If you don't tell them this information, some of it at least comes from someone who's being funded by the Democrats in an opposition campaign, and the fact that the FBI was paying him at one point, that there were other allegations that the judge never knew about. If I was one of these FISA judges, I would have a lot of questions about what I've learned today.
Sure, and that's actually a very legitimate point. So let's clarify what has and has not been clarified so far today. First of all, Mr. Steele was never paid by the FBI as part of this particular issue. It was not, they were considering it. They ultimately backed off on doing that. But what we now know is all this memo was a 3-page summary of a 50-something page submission, and Ken knows all about how detailed they are, and the fact that it's presumed that an informant, such as someone in the context of a Mr. Steele, will have some kind of bias. Judges are used to that. They understand that. What we don't know the full extent of is how much was truly told to the judge. There's disputes now on the public record of how much he did or didn't know, how much the judge knew about the extent of Mr. Steele's employment affiliation in terms of who was he working for. Now we know he knew some of the information. How much detail was provided is certainly a matter of concern, but nothing in the memo truly got into the details because all we have is this little summary, not the
There's
full
a lot
application.
we don't know. With that in mind, we got to go, but I want to ask you both just yes or no. Do you think that FISA applications should or will ever go public? Ken?
Yes, part of it.
And I agree. Well, at least a part of this has got to become public now, just to clear the air.
Okay. All right. Bradley and Ken, thank you both for lending us your legal expertise. Great to have you.
Absolutely. Have a good evening.
Good to be with you, Shannon.
All right, former Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page, he's the guy. Well, he's taking Yahoo News and the Huffington Post to court. Why he says today's memo bolsters his case against those media outlets. Our legal eagles will take that up next in Night Court. Night Court is now in session. Former Trump campaign volunteer Carter Page says he's going to update a slander lawsuit he currently has pending against the Huffington Post and Yahoo News, among others. Yahoo News published a report last fall that Page met 2 Kremlin figures in July 2016 and tried to negotiate an end to U.S. sanctions. According to the memo released today, the FISA application used to get permission to spy on Page cited that Yahoo News report, which the memo claims the FBI used to corroborate the so-called dirty dossier, but apparently it was the author of the dossier who leaked material to Yahoo News. If that's not confusing enough, we'll, figure it all out for you here. In a statement to the Washington Examiner, Page says this: I look forward to updating my pending legal action in opposition to the Department of Justice this weekend in preparation for Monday's next small step on the long potholed road toward helping to restore law and order in our great country. He's always colorful. Let's bring in our legal eagles, David Bruno, a criminal defense attorney and former prosecutor, and Bob Bianchi, a criminal defense attorney and former head county prosecutor. Great to have you both with us.
Hi, Shannon.
Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit from the original article back in 2016 that has upset Mr. Page. He says some of those, this is what it says about him, some of those briefed were taken aback when they learned about Page's contacts in Moscow, viewing them as a possible back channel to the Russians that could undercut U.S. foreign policy, said a congressional source. He was not too happy about that.
Yeah, but unfortunate for him, in his slander suit, which I believe is 400 pages long.
He's representing himself.
Filed by him pro se, is that a lot of what came out in this memo, and we know there's a lot more information that did not come out, verifies that, in fact, what he says is slander was true. And truth, as you know, Shannon, is an absolute defense to his slander suit. So unfortunately, in an ironic twist of fate for Mr. Page and his hat that he wears when he's in the rain and he's walking around, his slander suit has just gone down the tubes.
Okay, are you saying the truth is that they were quoting from a dossier they believe to be true, or the contents of the dossier are true?
Well, the contents of what the dossier is saying, or with respect to what was reported, have, in fact, that he is being looked at for having contacts with the Russians, is in fact turning out to be correct. And he himself has admitted to the media, which is another problem he has. When you're in a slander suit, you're arguing my reputation has been damaged. But he himself has said, yes, I've met Kislyak. Yes, I did have encounters with the Russians. Yes, I did go there. So a lot of this information is being verified. So I think his slander suit is gone.
But he is denying some of the things that have been alleged against him. And he says these people should have known better. It was a dirty dossier. And here's part of his complaint, as you mentioned, 400 pages long. He says on September 23rd, 2016, and perhaps the most dangerous, reckless, irresponsible, and historically instrumental monuments in modern day sensational crime story journalism. That's a lot of adjectives.
Definitely.
The Yahoo News Department of Defendant Oaths, that's the overall company, subsidiary Yahoo chose to publish a highly misleading article filled with false allegations. All right, so what are his best claims?
Yeah, his claim now, he does have to get rid of the defamation claim, because one of his points was he wasn't under investigation. Now we clearly know he was. There were warrants that got him a wiretap against him.
But what about his specific claims? There were meetings and things that they allege that he didn't attend and that he had no part of.
Sure, I guess those claims could still be pursued, but certainly not that he wasn't under investigation. That's clear. But now he can amend his complaint. I would imagine that he would amend it that his constitutional rights were violated violated his Fourth Amendment rights against unlawful searches and seizures. And that is that they secured this wiretap, this warrant against him, and they did not have probable cause. The argument is that Director Comey was the one who approved it and signed it, at least part of it, and he later said that it was unverified and salacious to Donald Trump 2 weeks later. You can't have it both ways. It can't be unverified and salacious and also be credible enough to be supporting probable cause.
Yeah, Carter Page would be out of his mind to continue with a lawsuit with Discovery. I have to disagree with my friend here because, listen, we know for years before he was on the radar. The Papadopoulos information came out, and he was an associate of the Trump campaign. And the Steele dossier came out, whether you agree with most of it or you don't. It had to have the FBI wondering, what is it with this guy, Carter Page? He keeps coming back up on the radar, and now we have this Papadopoulos situation. It was a completely valid thing as a law enforcement officer, as a person who was authorized these search warrants. And what, just one my last point before Dave goes. What amazes me that I love about this story is finally, as a former civil rights litigator arguing against police brutality, usually with black and brown people, people are finally now concerned about the constitutional rights of individuals, and that's a good thing.
Yeah,
10 seconds.
It's interesting you bring up Papadopoulos. It's number 5 in the Nunez memo. Papadopoulos had nothing to do with Page. There was no association, no conspiracy, and it shouldn't have been used in the warrant against Page.
They were both working for the Trump campaign.
Oh, boy. Or volunteers or tangentially associated at some point. Thank you both. Night court is over.
Thank you, Shannon.
All right, time for one of the most important stories of the night. These Lion Cubs were tasked with choosing the winner of the weekend's big game. Did they pick the Patriots or the Eagles? They're super cute either way. The answer is next. These little Lion Cubs in Dallas are predicting the big game on Sunday. They must love Tom Brady because they chose the Patriots to win. That's it for us from New York.